Welcome to this special edition of NACD's BoardVision. We just completed a virtual roundtable dealing with the subjects of communications between share owners and companies and boards. On today's virtual roundtable, we spoke on 4 issues. First, compensation and the related say-on-pay matters. Secondly, enhancing committee reports that are appearing in proxies and ways to make them better tools for share owner engagement. Third, new technologies that are available today that could be tested by your company to engage with share owners. And finally, director qualifications and board composition. I'm joined at this moment with Glenn Borum from the Vanguard Group and Denny Beresford from the NACD Board of Directors and several very large public corporations. Glenn, I'll start with you. What were your key takeaways today?
Well, Ken, I think regardless of the subject area we talked about, the one unifying theme that we kept coming back to is the need for dialogue between share owners and boards. So whether it's talking from the investor standpoint, what we're looking for in terms of pay principles and disclosures or director qualifications or any other governance matter, the need for dialogue to develop that shared understanding of what we're looking for, what the company's strategy is, and how those two things interact. And having it be a two-way conversation, not share owners dictating and boards listening, but also share owners listening, so that we ultimately get to the same place. We're in the same boat. We both are vested in the company's long-term success. So the need to communicate over time to develop that shared perspective on common issues is really the key takeaway for me.
Alignment's the key.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Denny, how about you?
Well, first of all, I'd like to agree with Glenn. I think sometimes, Ken, there's some thinking that the various share owner groups, or at least some of them, are working at cross purposes with directors, and that nothing could be farther from the truth. I think the key to most of our discussions was communications. The one topic that I think I was most impressed about was the talking about compensation disclosures in the proxy statement, and of course with the new say on pay, that's going to have a particular spotlight this year. And the share owner groups were very concerned about making sure that the company was really telling their story about not just getting lost in the trees about all the different tables and so forth, but also being able to communicate the strategy that the company has and the really important aspects of the company's compensation program and how pay is really driving performance in the company. And again, communicating well with people as opposed to just having a data dump, so to speak, in the 20 or 30 pages that it might take to comply with all the SEC rules.
Right, and I think that point was particularly important to me, to hear that the share owners, who are our stakeholders, recognize that there is a mandatory compliance disclosure aspect of this, but in addition, there is a real communications aspect. And the challenge is to figure out how you're actually going to get both done.
Correct.
So the other part of it, I thought this whole alignment thing, Glenn, critically important, and I think that you and your peers spoke about that repeatedly today. How maybe some of that alignment could take place, and how perhaps, or what perhaps, they're looking for to make that more clear to everybody, how to communicate it in a more clear manner.
Well, I think one of the keys, and Denny alluded to this, is this notion of cascading disclosure.
Yes, that's a very good point.
To effectively link the strategy or the philosophy around something like pay with the underlying process, and then finally the outcomes. So taking us from the 30,000-foot view of what's the philosophy and how does that connect with the strategy, to then how does that translate into a pay setting process, how are goals determined, how are targets established, and then finally, what outcomes did that translate into? So that gives us a really good picture from a shareholder standpoint as to that connection between pay and performance, how the compensation programs serve to reward and incent. And that's one of the best disclosures we see. They have those three components: the philosophy, the process, and the outcomes.
We also talked about director qualifications, and of course that was a last year first time disclosure.
Right.
But again, the share owners were saying, not very interested obviously in the backgrounds and so forth, but tell us more. Why are these people on the board? Do we have the right people?
What's the value add?
Exactly. And while the future people that are going on the board, you can't really talk about that succession planning very well in the disclosures. We were really more interested in that. Is the company doing a good job of planning in the future? And you can kind of glean that to some extent if they don't have anybody from a particular category, international or whatever the obvious kind of category that would fit that particular company, then the share owners are going to be concerned about it.
Exactly. And I also like some of the things that came out about new technologies,
right?
New ways to engage share owners. Well, Glenn, Denny, thank you so very much for joining us today. And you'll see that under the screen there is a website, and being an NACD member, you may go to that website and see the entire virtual roundtable. Thank you very much for being with us today.